Hello, I'm Mike Phillips, an Associate Trainer with Directory of Social Change, and I will be delivering this session, Being Kind to Yourself, as part of the Espresso Express online learning support. James Thurber got it right, I think, when he talked about change and survival, and we are certainly going through unprecedented change with coronavirus. So I hope you've grabbed yourself a cuppa, and as Julie Andrews sang in The Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning. Being kind to yourself is obviously a very big topic, and this isn't a training course. For the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be talking and sharing tips about these three things. And there will be 2 follow-up sessions on creating and maintaining a work-life balance and well-being tips for you and your colleagues. Most of us working in charities are focused on helping others and being kind. The reason I chose today's theme is I believe it is really important now to pause, reflect, and start being kind to ourselves. This will enable us to do what we are so passionate about, being kind and helping others. How are you feeling over the last few weeks? I don't know about you, however, I feel like I've been through a roller coaster of feelings since we entered lockdown. I've learned that there are no right or wrong ways of dealing with this crisis, and no right or wrong ways of feeling. Therefore, I thought I would share some very personal thoughts, together with some tips which I hope you will find useful. Now, I would never normally disclose this on a DSC training day. However, I was diagnosed HIV positive 30 years ago at the age of 22. I was told I wouldn't live to 25, and somehow I'm still here. HIV was a very different pandemic, of course. Yet there are lessons from that experience that I will be sharing during this session. Back then, there was a sense of panic, worries of passing on the virus, an absence of effective treatment and vaccine, grief as many of our friends got sick and died, limited and conflicting information, feelings of being isolated and frightened, a sense of being utterly overwhelmed by what was going on. Does that sound familiar? I don't mention this to be self-indulgent. I do so because I'm aware that there are some ideas and tips that I will share that come from that time and may be perceived as a little bit obvious or trite or even cheesy. We got through those early days of the HIV pandemic by ensuring that we were informed, engaging in activism, empowering ourselves and each other. We are giving mutual support, small acts of kindness, and above all, humor. We also learned to manage our feelings. In many ways, these are simple ideas and tools, although I can look back over 30 years and say that helped us to survive. That helped many of us overcome and survive that pandemic. Perhaps they are truisms for our survival today. So I hope that you will keep an open mind whilst tuning in today. To quote Justin Timberlake, we can't stop the feeling. Recognizing that right now is vital. All of us, whether we talk about it or not, are experiencing a range of difficult, sometimes extreme emotions. Those feelings are natural in a situation like this, and they can't be stopped. Since we all went into lockdown, I've been speaking with many friends and people who work in charities and those who work in dementia care, another area in which I train. They often say that they feel overwhelmed by some of the emotions that they are experiencing right now and by the situation itself. They say things like this: and they feel things like this: overwhelmed? Well, we're not alone. It's natural. We are human beings. How our brains work is complex, but I'll try to explain it in a simple way here. Our brains are hardwired to cope with the survival instinct. Even when we were cave women and cavemen, like Wilma and Fred Flintstone, our brains were hardwired to cope with predators, such as a saber-toothed tiger. It's called the reptilian part of our brain, and it's responsible for the fight or flight response, which I'm sure that you've heard of. Today, we don't have saber-toothed tigers, not even in Swansea, where I was born. The triggers are different. Things like impending deadlines, giving a presentation, or dealing with a difficult conversation or situation. Now, our trigger is coronavirus. When we feel and face these situations, our old reptilian brain kicks in. It triggers physical responses, the same as Wilma and Fred. In other words, we move from responding with logic and reason to reacting with our feelings. How our mind and body react now is exactly like Wilma and Fred's did when they were experiencing extreme pressure. Our fight or flight response or stress response is automatically triggered. Rather than respond with logic, we react from that basic instinct. In other words, our feelings. We react from our feelings. Or to put it in another way, we move from logic to instinct, feelings, and gut reactions. In modern times, we use the word stress to describe all this. It's not always a helpful way to describe it because, in fact, it's pressure. And pressure is good for us. It helps us to perform. Pressure is good, but if we have too much pressure, that tips the balance into stress. If we add, and then we get stress symptoms of all different kinds. Add to that thinking traps of unhelpful thinking styles, and we just make things worse. Do you know there's actually two types of stress? Eustress is a positive form of stress, the good stress that we get when watching a scary movie, for example. Distress is the bad type of stress when we end up in conflict. Deborah Alcock-Tyler's that's DSC's CEO, in her book, The Pleasure and the Pain, talks about the human onion. Now, at the core of that onion is the biology that makes us who we are, the genetics, if you like. Whether you're tall or short like me, or whether you've got long blonde hair or not much hair like me. Those are all things from our genes that we cannot change. At the next level of the onion, coming out from the core, is our values. Now, our values are developed very early on in life. We are usually not even aware of them. But those values come from our education, our parents, faith, if we have one, etc. So let's imagine that I have a value from wherever, that everything I do must be perfect. I must work hard. That in turn leads to my beliefs. So if my work isn't perfect, I'm a failure, is my belief. That leads to our feelings. So let's imagine I've been asked to give a presentation. If I've got a value that everything has to be perfect and I'm a failure if things aren't perfect as a belief, then I'm going to feel nervous. I'm going to feel anxious. And that in turn affects my behavior. I either procrastinate and then don't talk to friends or stay up all night. It affects my behavior. That's what people outside of me see. All the rest is inside of me. Some of you may have heard of Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he talks about the circle of influence and the circle of concern. I was talking to a fundraising friend recently, and I became aware of this as she was talking. She was telling me about how a fundraising concert has had to be cancelled due to coronavirus. As she talked through the situation, I became aware that she was focusing on the concern, and that was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The concern was taking over, the venue had to be cancelled, the volunteer entertainers had to be cancelled, the potential loss of income for the charity. She was exhausted. Suddenly her influence had reduced because the concern was so much bigger. Instead, I invited her to focus on the circle of influence. For example, what if the event would be delivered online through Facebook or Zoom? Could the singers contribute remotely? Could the audience watch and donate online instead? Suddenly, the circle of influence got bigger and the circle of concern got smaller. My fundraiser friend was feeling less overwhelmed, she felt calm, more in control, and she now had a list of things to do to move forward. So what about you? Do you mainly focus on your circle of concern, or do you focus on the circle of influence? Modern life, work demands, technology has turned us all into what I call human doings rather than human beings. When we are busy doing stuff, we can forget our feelings, especially the more difficult ones. Once we stop our busyness, though, those feelings come straight back and poke us in the eye. As much as we may try to ignore them, they won't go away. The spider's web of feelings that many of us are experiencing is natural in the circumstance. And this is having an impact on us personally and our ability to work effectively during this period. It's interesting that a spider's web is simultaneously fragile, complex, and strong. Perhaps one of the positive things about COVID is that it forces us to be human again, be a human being, in tune with our spider's web of complex feelings, focus on what is most important to us, connect with ourselves and with others in a different, perhaps more authentic and genuine way. The good news is that although many of us feel that things are outside of our control, there are many simple things that we can do to feel greater control. And here are just some tips for managing our feelings. I must say, if things are really tough, please reach out to specialist organizations like Mind and Samaritans. Today's slides and a handout to accompany this Espresso Express session includes links to brain-friendly music, which can help us feel calm and focused whilst working, and other useful resources. So today, I've been talking about acknowledging and managing our feelings. In the next session, we'll be talking about creating and maintaining a work-life balance, well-being tips for you and your colleagues, and whichever charity you work for, remember, you make a real difference. Keep focusing on that vision. For now, I hope that you manage to stay safe and healthy, be kind to yourselves and others. Thank you from me and from DSC for tuning into this Espresso Express. Do share with others and have a look out for further information.